guess you were looking for me. What? Oh, they just got me.
You'll get there in time. You know, they don't need much time.
They respond, but some of them, some of the Russians supply them out.
Yeah.
It's a lot of politics in Africa. Some of them
Right behind.
Okay, arrival.
this guy from that country.
Oh, this is the Holy See.
Holy See. Oh.
Holy See.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is the UN failing Ukraine?
I don't know what's
On what?
Kind of like the UN is a territory.
People have been responding to it. He did. Oh, that guy did?
Well, can't really get
Okay.
around as much anymore.
Good morning, Ambassador.
I want to see if we can delay it a little bit.
Iran and
Program goes for a while. Program goes for an hour. Yeah, no, he hasn't even arrived. I just want to do the live after. Can we delay the live for a bit? Can we delay the live for a bit?
Ma'am, I would recommend you put that delay. I just want to let you know next one comes around, gets been around. I don't want to knock anything down.
Just want to arrive.
no, it's not Arab. It's not Arab. My God. Please, it's crap. They don't speak Arab. But they're very similar scripts. Yeah, but they have different letters.
Very different language.
Yeah, if you read Arabic, you're not necessarily.
I was just saying.
Rival, not African.
Okay, not Iran. This is all. You know everybody. Okay, arrival. Arrival.
not got any.
Morning.
Hello, hi.
Good morning.
Been doing enough to help Ukraine?
Yeah, I'm gonna call the DFP. DFP is here. Yeah, I'm gonna call her. Je déclare ouverte la 6e séance
The
plénière
sixth plenary
de
meeting of
l'Assemblée
the General
générale.
Assembly is called to order.
Avant de poursuivre,
Before proceeding further, I would like to remind members that masks are to be worn by all attendees at all times when indoors, except when directly addressing a meeting. Due to the temporary closure of the east side emergency doors, in the event of a fire or an emergency which requires an evacuation, please use the west side emergency doors and the stairway next to the elevator banks.
Mr. President, Heads of State and Government, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, on behalf of the government and people of Nigeria, I congratulate you on your well-deserved election as President of the 77th session of this August Assembly. I assure you of the full support and cooperation of the Nigerian delegation during your tenure. I commend your predecessor, His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, for the many remarkable achievements of the General Assembly under his leadership during these challenging times. May I also congratulate the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, on his ceaseless and untiring efforts to promote peace, security, and development, very much in line with his exalted role. Mr. President, the first time I could have addressed this August Assembly was in 1984, when I was the military head of state of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. 31 years later, I had the great privilege to personally address the Assembly in 2015 as the democratically elected president of my country. As I approach the end of my second and final four-year term, I am reminded of how much has changed in Nigeria, in Africa, and in the world, and yet how some challenges remain. We are now more severely tested by these enduring and the new global challenges, paramount among which are conflicts increasingly being driven by non-state actors, proliferation of small arms and light weapons, terrorism, violent extremism, malignant use of technology, climate change, irregular migration, and disparities in opportunities for improved standards of living. Despite the challenging international environment, the United Nations has proved that it can be strong when the will of its members is harnessed for positive collective action. The guiding principles of this extraordinary institution is the promotion of peace and security, development, and human rights. Latest in a chain of events challenging these principles is the Ukraine conflict, which has already created strains that are perhaps unprecedented for a generation. Such a conflict will have adverse consequences for us all, hindering our capacity to work together to resolve conflicts elsewhere, especially in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Indeed, the ongoing war in Ukraine is making it more difficult to tackle the perennial issues that feature each year in the deliberations of this Assembly, such as nuclear disarmament, the right of the Rohingya refugees to return to their homes in Myanmar, and the Palestinians' legitimate aspirations for statehood and reduction of inequalities within and among the nations. The danger of escalation of the war in Ukraine further justifies Nigeria's resolute calls for a nuclear-free world and a universal arms trade treaty, which are also necessary measures to prevent global human disasters. In this regard, we must find quick means to reach consensus on the nuclear non-proliferation treaty with related commitments by nuclear weapon states. I remain firmly convinced that the challenges that have come so sharply into focus in recent years and months emphasize the call by Nigeria and many other member states for the reform of the Security Council and other United Nations agencies. We need more effective and representative structure to meet today's demands that have since outgrown a system designed for the very different world that prevailed at its foundation in 1945. Change is long overdue. Mr. President, this is the first meeting we are having here in New York without the restrictions that characterized the last 3 years. The coronavirus pandemic ripped across national borders like a toxic whirlwind, leaving in its wake a legacy of pain and loss. Happily, we are also witnessed an incredible level of innovation and creativity from those who devised treatments and vaccines. These laudable achievements were underpinned by partnerships and international cooperation. We have also seen the bravery, care, and endurance of health professionals at every corner of the globe. With coronavirus, we saw very clearly how states tried to meet the challenge of a threat that could not be contained within national borders. The results were mixed, but at its best, cooperation among stakeholders was outstanding. It facilitated solutions that saved countless lives and eased the huge burden of human suffering. That same theme of unilateralism and the promotion of national interests competing with the common cause in the face of an existential threat has been our recurring experience in recent times. In every address I have delivered to this August Assembly, I have dwelt on the issue of climate change, especially as it fuels conflicts and complicates food security. Climate change reduces opportunity and prosperity, which in Africa, Latin America, and some parts of Asia also contribute to transitional organized crimes. As part of Nigeria's effort at achieving our global net zero aspiration, the current administration last year adopted a national climate change strategy that aims to deliver climate change mitigation in a sustainable manner. The measures we took at the national level also require climate justice. Africa and other developing nations produce only a small proportion of greenhouse gas emissions compared to industrialized economies. Yet, we are the hardest hit by the consequences of climate change, as we see in the sustained droughts in Somalia and floods of unprecedented severity in Pakistan. These and other climate-related occurrences are now sadly becoming widely commonplace in the developing world. We are, in effect, literally paying the price for policies that others pursue. This needs to change. At the COP26 in Glasgow last year, I did say that Nigeria was not asking for permission to make the same mistakes that others have made in creating the climate emergency. Fortunately, we now know what we can do to mitigate the effects of the climate crisis and the related energy challenge. As a first step, we must all commit to releasing the financing and the technology to create a stable and affordable framework for energy transmission. Development financial institutions must prioritize de-risking energy projects to improve access of renewable projects to credit facilities. There should be no countries left behind in this question. Rocketing energy costs worldwide are, in part, the product of conflict and supply disruptions to Europe and the Americas. Yet, we are all paying the price. It is therefore our expectation that this UNGA 77 and the upcoming COP27 will help galvanize the political will required to drive action towards the fulfillment of the various existing climate change initiatives. Another feature of the last decade that has been the growing partnership between states and the increasingly influential non-state actors. There was a time when the most important event at this assembly was the speech by the world's most powerful leaders. Now, a tweet or Instagram post by an influencer on social or environmental issues may have greater impact. Technology offers us greatly limitless opportunities and sometimes runs ahead of the imagination of regulators and legislators. At its best, social media helps strengthen the foundation of our society and our common values. At its lowest, it is a corrosive digital version of the mob, bristling with intolerance and division. In confronting these challenges, we must also come together to defend freedom of speech while upholding other values that we cherish. We must continue to work for a common standard that balances rights with responsibilities to keep the most vulnerable from harm and help strengthen and enrich communities. Efforts to protect communities from the scourge of disinformation and misinformation must also be matched with efforts to reduce inequalities and restore hope to our poorer and most vulnerable of our communities as a means to stem the many socio-economic conflict drivers with which we are faced. In spite of our efforts, humanitarian crisis will continue to ravage some of our communities. Nigeria, therefore, implores our global partners to do more to complement our endeavors. Indeed, the multifaceted challenges facing most developing countries have placed a debilitating chokehold on their fiscal space. This equally calls for the need to address the burden of unsustainable external debt by a global commitment to the expansion and extension of the debt service suspension initiative to countries facing fiscal and liquidity challenges as well as outright cancellation for countries facing the most severe challenges. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, democracy is an idea that crosses time and borders. Certainly, democracy does not have its limitations. The wheels of democracy turn slowly. It can demand compromises that dilute decisions. Sometimes it bends too much to special interests that exercise influence, not always for the general good, in a manner disproportionate to their numbers. But it has been my experience that a democratic culture provides a government with the legitimacy it needs to deliver positive change. In Nigeria, not only have we worked to strengthen our democracy, but we have supported it and promoted the rule of law in our sub-region. In the Gambia, we helped guarantee the first democratic transition since independence. In Guinea-Bissau, we stood by the democratically elected government when it faced mutiny. And in the Republic of Chad, following the tragic death of its president, the late Idris Deby Itno, in the battlefield, we joined forces with its other neighbors and international partners to stabilize the country and encourage the peaceful transition to democracy, a process which is ongoing. We believe in the sanctity of constitutional term limits, and we have steadfastly adhered to it in Nigeria. We have seen the corrosive impact on values when leaders elsewhere seek to change the rules to stay on power. Indeed, we now are preparing for general elections in Nigeria next February. As the 78th UNGA, there will be a new face at this podium speaking for Nigeria. Ours is a vast country, strengthened by its diversity and its common values of hard work, enduring faith, and a sense of community. We have invested heavily to strengthen our framework for free and fair elections. I thank our partners for all the support that they have provided our elections. As President, I have set the goal that one of the enduring legacies I would like to leave is to entrench a process of free, fair, and transparent, credible election through which Nigerians elect their choice. Mr. President, the multiple challenges that face us are truly interconnected and urgent, and your choice of this season's theme, a watershed moment, transformative solution to interlocking challenges, is apt, in keeping with our obligation as member states of this noble organization. We'll almost do our utmost to work with you towards resolving them. In this regard, I reiterate my delegation's full and resolved cooperation. Let me convey my final reflection from this famous podium. We live in extraordinary times with independent challenges but enormous opportunities. The face of change can seem bewildering, with sometimes a palpable and unsettling sense of uncertainty about our future. But if my years in public service have taught me anything, it is that we must keep faith with those values that endure. These include, but not limited to, such values as justice, honor, integrity, ceaseless endeavor, and partnership within and between nations. Our strongest moments have always been when we remain true to the basic principle of tolerance, community, and abiding commitment to peace and goodwill towards all. I thank you all.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Sayyid Ebrahim Raisi, President of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Mr. Sayyid Ebrahim Raisi, President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Blessings and greetings be upon you in the name of God, the Creator, the Omnipotent, the Most Gracious, and the Most Merciful. May the blessings of the Almighty shine upon the Prophet Muhammad and his descendants and successors. The Holy Quran states, "Dear Creator, Omnipotent of the world, accept our regards and respects towards your chosen messengers, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Prophet Muhammad, who brought the message of justice, spirituality, and proper behavior and compassionate comportment to the people of the world, and they destroyed the foundations of injustice and lack of fairness to allow humans to build a new world for their future." Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Secretary General, the foundational need for a better world is justice. All of the hopes and aspirations of humankind are built on justice, and they have the capacity for the creation of such a framework of all-encompassing justice, which means elimination of injustice. We are defenders of a fight against injustice in all of its forms, against humanity, against spirituality, against the Almighty, against the people of the world, no matter where it may occur. A wish to be closer to the Creator and the teachings of the Creator exists in all humanity, and their willingness for change is witnessed in revolutions throughout the history of humanity. Even though a lot of movements never reach the maturity of a revolution, many of the revolutions deviated from their original path. However, the success of many people and nations, such as the nation of Iran, in the realization of their aspiration for the Islamic revolution has strengthened in the heart of the people around the globe such aspirations. The Islamic Revolution of Iran was the realization of the movement of the people of Iran towards justice and fairness. Even though faced with a lot of plots throughout the decades, it has been able to safeguard itself. As a first step, the nation of Iran, based on an advanced social and organizational order, created the Islamic Republic of Iran in order to create justice internally and bring to the world order a message of justice and fairness. Key components on this path were spirituality, multilateralism. Ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful and honored to be the representative of a people and a nation that has inherited a great civilization that has been free for millennia. and has always managed to defeat the plots of the enemies that sought to conquer it, a nation that has always seen oppression as an existential enemy and has always fought in order to destroy the enslavement of Babylonians all the way to the Palestinians. We believe in a common fate for humanity, and we are for the globalization of justice. What we seek for ourselves, we wish onto others as well, and what we do not wish for ourselves, we do not impose on others. The nation of Iran believes that justice brings unity, brings cohesion, and warfare is a destroyer of all things. For a country that wishes internally to have justice, but then outside of its own borders creates or trains various terrorist groups and unleashes them on various nations, must be ashamed in the face of humanity, must be ashamed when faced with principles of freedom and justice and fairness. Humanity does not only belong to certain segments of the world. The Islamic Republic of Iran, by taking aspiration from its constitution and the values, the spiritual values upon which it is based, sees as one of the most effective ways to safeguard human rights and has used the most useful tools in order to realize and assist in the realization of the rights of all of the oppressed across the globe, sees that as one of its inherent duties. The Islamic Republic of Iran rejects some of the double standards of some governments vis-à-vis human rights and sees that as the most important factor which has rendered banal the topic of human rights in the eyes of many, because this is something that is currently taking place, a discourse that is taking place in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where we started speaking of and creating a dialogue about the death of tens of innocent women in a Western country. So until we have these double standards where attention is solely focused on one side and not all equally, we will not have true justice and fairness. Human rights belongs to all, but unfortunately it is trampled upon by many governments. The native tribes of Canada, whose bodies of hundreds of their children were discovered in mass graves in a school, the rights of the Palestinians, the right to life of the occupied of an occupied people, of those who have fallen victim to terrorism, those who seek freedom and refuge, but only to have their children locked up in cages. All of this shows that the place of the accused and the defender must not be judged solely as it is represented by some. It does need a foundation which many lack these days in order to claim the right to safeguard human rights. When talking about and remembering the savagery and the crimes of ISIS, of Daesh, that enslaved Christian and Yazidi and other religious minorities, women and children, it shows when we entered the arena to defeat them, it shows that we have been clearly on the side and as defenders of human rights, and those who defended and promoted Daesh, ISIS, had to be seated at the table of the accused. Dear ladies and gentlemen gathered here today, we see today that we are witnessing a change of the world order, a unilateral world, a world of hegemony, a world in which financial power gains control over standards of behavior, where criminal and oppressive sanctions against nations and the use of international organizations as a tool of oppression and exerting pressure on defenseless nations In other words, we're speaking of a world completely privy of justice and fairness. So this order has lost its support in the thought of nations and people throughout the globe. A new order has been shaping up to take its place, and it's without a doubt that it will be created from Lebanon to the Palestine-occupied territories. And all over our region, we see the defeated policies of such an old system. Now we see terrorism. We see the trampling upon of native cultures and religions, and standing unjustly against multilateralism, unilateral actions. All of these have created great challenges on the path to human progress. We firmly believe that in order to face the challenges, old challenges as well as new frameworks in the world, we have no choice but cohesiveness and unity based on multilateralism and justice, based on shared human and common values, based on divine teachings. There is no other path. We believe that all freedom-seeking nations have their hearts tied to such deep-rooted values, and the defense of all of these values against the oppressors across the globe rests on our shoulders. What we seek is the right of the Iranian nation, of the Iranian people. A relationship based on oppression will not be tolerated. We will stand firm and proudly defend the rights of our people and our nation. We believe that any oppressive action is an action against world peace and stability, which is a threat to the entire world. Reaching security throughout the world through any path other than justice would not be sustainable or permanent, and that is precisely what we expect of the United Nations to support and do. Of course, the implementation of justice and fairness is quite challenging and difficult, and perhaps it is because of that many of those who claim to be on the side of peace, they run away from the responsibility of peace. So we say unto them, since you do not wish to carry the burden on your shoulder, do you not even wish to carry the burden of fighting against oppression? Our belief is deeply rooted in the Quranic culture that says, do not be oppressors nor oppress anyone. And the fate of many nations is tied to exactly these principles. Those who run away from the logic of character, fairness, and justice run to unilateralism and oppressive powers. A nation that lacks logic relies on coups d'etats, military interventionism, boots on the ground, a chosen and unfair selective fight against terrorism, and many other injustices. The use of nuclear weapons, did that take the world closer to fairness, justice, and peace, or did it become the foundation for hegemonic powers? The killing of hundreds of thousands of Yemeni, Iraqi, Syrian, and Afghan children, which human value did that serve? Were these not the evil faces of the total lack of justice and fairness in many parts of the world? And in reality, what does the Islamic Republic of Iran seek other than obtaining its own logical and fair right, which has caused havoc and chaos among the oppressors of the world? Dear colleagues, today the willingness to move in support of hegemony has become a sore point for humanity throughout the world, and it is a serious threat. It is the wish of the nations across the world on an increasing basis to obtain justice, independence, while enjoying security at the same time. the realization of the front of resistance shows, I repeat it, the realization of the doctrine of resistance shows the extreme and deep-rooted willingness of many people to obtain true justice, whereas unilateralism has been the tool that has been used to hold many countries back on a selective basis. America cannot accept that certain countries have the right to stand on their own 2 feet, and they keep equivocating militarism with security. The Friends of America do not enjoy a better situation. What is occurring today in Europe is a mirror image of what has occurred in Western Asia in the past few decades. The comportment and the result of the movement of the troops throughout these regions all have yielded the same results, because all of them have shown that the fate of many countries shows that America has pursued her own interest at the expense of the interest of many other countries. Mr. Secretary General, dear colleagues, the Islamic Revolution in Iran was the beginning of a movement of a great nation of Iran to seek her own place in the world. And through the decades, we have been faced with foreign plots such as coups d'etats, oppressive sanctions, as well as hegemonic interventions. But none of the successes of the Iranian nation have been acceptable to the great powers. From the time that the first president of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, the late Mr. Raja'i, showed the sole of his feet that had been tortured savagely and placed his foot upon this podium some 40 years ago and showed the scars of the torture that he was subjected to at the hands of the Shah's secret police. After that speech in this very hall, he was martyred by the hypocrites. About a decade after, the late Imam Khomeini made it so that the nation of Iran was able to repel foreign aggression from her territory and be in charge of her own destiny. The people of Iran, who have themselves been victims of terrorism, have today become a supporter that can be counted on in the fight against terrorism throughout the region. Today, the Islamic Republic of Iran, in order to reach her just aspirations, has spent much capital. From the time when Saddam Hussein tore up the Algiers Accord and attacked Iran in an unprovoked manner, all the way to the time when the American government trampled upon the nuclear accord, and we saw a new phase of criminal behavior against humanity. Some time ago, the previous president of the United States of America announced that ISIS was created by the United States of America. For us, it makes no difference whether ISIS, Daesh, was made by which administration, which American government. What matters is that a government on the other side of this planet decided to bring havoc and chaos to the geography of our region at the expense of the lives and the blood of women and children and the innocents. But the Islamic Republic resistance put an end to that movement, to that destructive movement. And the leader that descended into the arena of the fight against terrorism was no one other than the beloved, became a martyr on the path of obtaining the freedom of the nations of the region. And the previous president of the United States of America effectively managed to sign the document of the savage crime, an illegal crime, an immoral crime. And what was said in so many words shows that the oppression that is imposed upon the nations of the region in such a fashion it has managed to heal some of the broken hearts that we saw in result of this crime. The proper pursuit of justice in the face of a crime that the American president admitted to have put his signature on will not be abandoned. We seek through a fair tribunal, we will pursue through a fair tribunal to bring to justice those who martyred our beloved General Qasem Soleimani. Ladies and gentlemen, the history of Iran is the history of a nation that has learned to stand on her own 2 feet and not to lean on anyone else, to depend on anyone else. Iran learned this lesson after, in both world wars, it announced its neutrality, yet was always subject in both wars to foreign occupation. And after, in the 1950s, when it came towards America and relied on America in order to obtain the national dream of the nationalization of the oil industry, it was again betrayed. And after the nuclear accord was signed and accepted within the framework of the United Nations Security Council, even that accord was trampled upon unilaterally. Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, the nation of Iran has learned the policy of resistance and progress, which has been focused on pursuing because of an advanced and logical social order in which the Islamic Republic of Iran today, despite the oppressive sanction, has become a strong country with many impressive goals in the fields of technology and knowledge and expertise that have been obtained. We do believe that the world today needs a strong Iran. Today, while having the capabilities to export and in addition to our exports of oil and gas, we do have distribution networks for electricity throughout our vast nation. In knowledge seeking, biosciences, nanotechnology, nuclear sciences, we are at the forefront. And Iran's growth in these sectors is considerable. And it shows our social efforts where, in many instances, for example, when we have tried to bring universal healthcare coverage to 85 million people. And the pursuit of the will of the people is a foundation of the system of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Whereas during the times of the imposed war by Iraq against Iran, we were even prevented from being able to purchase barbed wire. But today we have been able to manufacture, through indigenous knowledge and capabilities, the most modern needed systems to defend our nation. People of the world, dear colleagues, Mr. Secretary General, it wasn't that our enemies took a step back. It was our nation that managed to drive all of her enemies from the arena by participating in an impressive and unprecedented fashion in the Islamic Revolution to solidify values of faith and divine will. In the second step, the policy of good neighborly relations. Progress in economic and trade relations have now been brought to the forefront of the Islamic Republic's foreign policy. We wish to have extensive relations with all nations throughout the world, particularly with our neighbors. War is not the solution to crises. Dialogue and conversations and negotiations are the true solutions. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as a powerful country in the region, is present and willing to solve crises. During the past few years, the regional trade of Iran has seen impressive increases, and we have now entered with our neighbors into a new season of expansion of friendly, neighborly, and brotherly ties. This brings stability, this brings security to all sides. We proved during the hard times of all of our neighboring countries that we are their true friends. During the numerous conversations that I've had with regional leaders, one of the main points was that the regional security must be born from within and not from the outside. And the way to realize that is collaboration and cooperation, not by forming opposing blocs. We must rely on brotherly and friendly relations. If we leave the fate and the destiny of the nations of the region in their own hands, then the occupiers will be gone, and neighbors will remain for one another in eternity. In a not-too-distant past, we saw the fires of war between the two brotherly nations of Iraq and Iran by the encouragement of enemy powers throughout the world. But today we see the marches of Arba'in in observation of the 40th day of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. We see that that grand, glorious march takes place in observance of that martyrdom, and in order to renew our faith in those values and to respect those who gave their lives, the descendants of the Prophet who gave their lives for human dignity and human values. Dear colleagues, I would like to direct your attention to one of the most egregious points that shows the oppressive powers present in the region. The region has not seen previously such a occupying savage power such as the Zionist regime in its midst in the past. The killing of children and women are present in the dark report card of the Zionist regime. It has managed to form the biggest prison in the world in Gaza. And the building of the expansion of settlements and housing illegally on Palestinian territories and on Palestinian farms, and the killing of their children and new generations shows everyone that 7 decades of Israeli occupation and savagery is still with us and not ending. But the world powers must show why they keep running away and evading the solutions proposed by the Islamic Republic of Iran in order to resolve the Palestinian crisis. All of the Palestinian territory from mountainous region to the sea requires only one solution, which is the reliance on the votes of all Palestinians, composed of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, in a completely comprehensive referendum. The occupying Zionist power that has occupied Jerusalem and occupies other lands in the region cannot be a partner for security and stability. Dear colleagues, allow me to focus your attention on another face of lack of justice and fairness, which is the double standard used when speaking of the nuclear capacities, nuclear science capacities of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And we all know that it's for only human and peaceful endeavors, but some countries are keen on portraying this as a threat in order to sweep under the rug what they should rightly face themselves, which should be denuclearization And I announce as the leader of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran is not seeking to build or obtain nuclear weapons. And such weapons have no place in our doctrine. This has been brought into the framework of a fatwa, of an official fatwa announced by His Eminence Supreme Leader Imam Khamenei, and a Sharia-based fatwa issued by His Eminence is more valuable than any measures with any outside or international agencies. And all of this is taking place in an environment where countries themselves who seek to show us unjustly as a threat keep pursuing nuclear weapons and development and testing, and have made a gift of those weapons of mass destruction to the Zionist government. And those governments that must be disarmed are awarded. But those who are observing proper frameworks are even threatened by NPT measures. And in a framework where only 2% of the nuclear activities of the world are taking place in Iran, Iran has been the subject of 35% of nuclear inspections. I will repeat, only 2% of world nuclear activities are taking place in Iran. 35% of nuclear inspections are in Iran. So I ask all of those here present today to please focus on the next following points with precision. 1. The Islamic Republic of Iran, with goodwill, signed an agreement, accepted an agreement in 2015, and in a first phase did live up to all of her commitments without any exceptions. But the result of that was the trampling upon by America on that agreement, and as they themselves said in so many words, they were unprecedented measures, oppressive sanctions measures in history. Sanctions are an imposed punishment on the people of Iran for being freedom seekers. A weapon of mass destruction. That's what sanctions are. And abiding by those or cooperating in the implementation of those is helping oppression take root. It was America that trampled upon and left the agreement, not Iran. The International Atomic Energy Agency issued 15 different reports stating precisely that Iran had remained fully committed to all of her commitments. Number 3, Iran, while simultaneously paid the price for having lived up to her commitments, but as a result of the trampling upon by the United States and the cooperation of the European side by the United States has not been given the opportunity to obtain the rewards of such agreement, the rights of such agreements. We did give the ample opportunities for those who trampled upon and left this agreement to return to it. We have been extremely flexible, and had it not been for our flexibility, the negotiations would have stopped in the very first few days. The logic of negotiations of Iran is a just analysis of what is going on, and our wish is only one thing: commitment, observance of commitments. Now, the issue of guarantees is not just for something that may happen. We're basing that on lived experience. We're speaking of the experience of America having left the JCPOA. And we have a year and a half of negotiations with the current American government to return, for her to return to the fulfillment of her commitments. And while today they speak of observing their commitments to this deal, they keep repeating the same old stories of the past, which puts a great deal of doubt on her true commitment to return to this agreement. Which brings us to another challenge. Can we truly trust without guarantees and assurances that they will this time live up to their commitment? Of course, the Islamic Republic of Iran, with various well-established and vast relationships with countries across the globe, has managed to neutralize, in many cases, the sanctions and created new opportunities. According to the United States of America herself, as announced many times by many government officials, the maximum pressure policy has suffered an embarrassing defeat. We have found our path independent of any agreement, and we will continue on that path steadfastly. At the same time, while we are very serious in the negotiations, and we have shown and we have proven that if the rights of the people of Iran are respected, there is a great and serious will to resolve all issues. We believe that the knot of the nuclear deal must be opened from the same place where they managed to tie this knot together. Friends, esteemed representatives of nations, the last part of my words with you is based on the need felt throughout the world for world justice and fairness. Every single one of us, every single human must be a part of building, actively building a new world based on justice, based on human values. If we wish the new world to be acceptable, to be one of character, to be one that is powerful and successful in resolving challenges facing humanity, has no solution other than to be based on international fairness and justice, which needs the following principles. One, feeling collectively responsible throughout the world against oppression. Number two, respect for the wish and will of the people and nations, and refraining from direct engagement in their internal affairs. 3, elimination of double standards. 4, standing up against violence and war. 5, independence and prudence in the actions of international organizations. And most importantly, the creation of roles for dignified and qualified humans of experience so they can create this new system. Our viewpoint towards the horizon of the future is very realistic, and we firmly believe that based on divine promises as delivered by the prophets, justice will take over the world, and those who are true followers of divine commands will be blessed by the reappearance of the last Messiah. I thank you all sincerely for your kind attention. May the blessings of the Omnipotent be on you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran for his statement, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency, Mr. UNGA, President of Mongolia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency UNGA, President of Mongolia, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to convey my heartfelt congratulations to Your Excellency Chabakuroshi on your unanimous election as the President of the UN General Assembly and wish every success in the work of the 77th session. We have no doubt that the 77th session of the General Assembly will play an important role in intensifying social and economic recovery of the countries of the world in the post-pandemic epoch, implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, combating climate change and desertification, and determining ways to resolve international crises and conflicts through dialogue on peaceful means. Last year, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of Mongolia's full-fledged membership to the United Nations, and this year, we are observing the 30th anniversary of Mongolia's declaration of its territory as a nuclear weapon-free zone, and the 20th anniversary of Mongolia's participation in the UN peacekeeping operations. Therefore, on behalf of my country and people, it's a great privilege for me to state from this honorable podium that during these 6 decades, Mongolia has been a responsible member of the United Nations, actively participating in multilateral cooperation of the international community, and making tangible contribution to global peace and security, as well as well-being and development of mankind. Mr. President, the whole world is going through hard times of difficult ordeals and challenges, such as poverty, inequality, climate change, pandemic, and the pandemic-driven difficulties to customs, transport, and logistics, price increase, inflation, as well as geostrategic and geopolitical tensions. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute report, even in the difficult times when the countries of the world were closing their borders, imposing restrictions and quarantines to protect their lives and half of their citizens from COVID-19 pandemic, and running into economic crises, the world military expenditure continued to grow in 2021, reaching an all-time high of $2.1 trillion. If this huge budget and funds spent on the military and armaments were dedicated to the least developed and developing countries, how many millions of children's future would have been brighter? How many millions would have been lifted out of poverty? How many millions would have been freed from hunger and disease? How many millions would have had food and opportunity for education, employment, and places to live? It is time for all of us to ponder and reflect on what progress could have been achieved if this huge amount of money had been spent on the pressing issues of combating global warming and climate change. It is truly regrettable that the situation in the world is deteriorating, and mistrust and misunderstanding are deepening, even though in the 20th century the mankind has had enough sufferings, such as the scourge of the 2 world wars, the Cold War divide, interreligious conflicts, and terrorism. Therefore, in today's complex reality, we should always strive to learn from mistakes of the past, uphold mutual trust, understanding, and respect, and make every effort to resolve any misunderstanding, conflict, or war by peaceful means and dialogue. 8 centuries ago, our ancestor, the great Genghis Khan, united all Mongolian dwellers, founded the great Mongolian state under the power of the eternal blue sky, put an end to the centuries-long wars and conflicts, pacified West and East under the statehood rule of justice, and established the Pax Mongolica and the vast terrain of Eurasia. Scholars and researchers around the world view the establishment of the Pax Mongolica as an important contribution of Mongols to the world history and the advancement of humankind, and emphasize that Pax Mongolica played an important role in the development of free trade between countries, laid the foundation for diplomacy and exchange of envoys, as well as proclaimed the ideas of religious freedom and the rule of law without imposing one's culture and religion on others. The UNGA resolution entitled 800 Years of Mongolian Statehood, adopted in 2005, highly appreciated the contribution of Mongols to the history of mankind and recognized that the nomadic civilization influenced inter alia societies across Asia and Europe, and in turn absorbed influence from both East and West, and in a true interchange of human values, further recognized the important role played by a strong and persistent nomadic culture in the development of extensive trade networks and the creation of large administrative, cultural, religious, and commercial centers, and likewise acknowledged the ever-increasing significance and relevance of a culture of living in harmony with nature, which is inherent in nomadic civilization in today's world. This indicates that Pax Mongolica contained progressive ideas which could form the basis of the collective efforts of the international community to maintain peace and stability in the modern world. Therefore, we, the descendants of the founders of the Pax Mongolica, call on the international community to understand each other, cooperate, and manage any conflict through peaceful dialogue, so that our blue planet will be at peace and the Pax Globalica will be established. We further call on people of the world to combine efforts to achieve this noble goal. Mongolia has consistently pursued a peace-loving, open, multi-pillar and independent foreign policy. A clear recognition of this policy by the international community was expressed by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres as a, and I quote, a symbol of peace in a troubled world, end of quote, during his official visit to Mongolia in August 2022. Mongolia has been actively participating in the promotion of international peace and security, as well as peacekeeping efforts, and has put forward numbers of proposals and initiatives in the past, a notable example of which is the declaration of this territory as a nuclear weapon-free zone. In his statement at the opening of the 10th REFCON of the NPT, the UN Secretary General warned that humanity is just one misunderstanding, one miscalculation away from the nuclear annihilation. In this connection, I urge not only member state parties to the treaty, but also all UN member states to exert political will and courage to build a world free of nuclear weapons, unite and work together wholeheartedly and faithfully for the sake of our Mother Earth, peace, and future generations. Mongolia considers that nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, complete elimination of nuclear weapons, and establishment of nuclear weapon-free zones are the best and effective means of building a world free of nuclear weapons. Therefore, we consider the international recognition of Mongolia's nuclear weapon-free status as our tangible contribution and effort to this cause. Mr. President, this year marks the 20th anniversary of Mongolia's participation in the UN peacekeeping operations. During this period, more than 20,000 Mongolian military personnel have served in the UN peacekeeping operations and other international peacekeeping operations in hotspots around the world. Since 2006, when Mongolia sent its first female officer to the UN peacekeeping operations, by the number of female peacekeepers, we are among the top 20 and the ranking of 120 contributing countries. Mongolia is firmly committed to the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and the call by the UNDPKO to increase the number of women serving in the UN peacekeeping operations to 15% by 2027. Within the framework of this objective, at the initiative of Mongolia, we have hosted an international conference on strengthening the role of women in peacekeeping last June. The conference, which brought together female peacekeepers from more than 30 countries and representatives of the international organizations, became a notable event for sharing and exchanging knowledge, experience, and lessons learned. We have also put forward an initiative to host this conference every 5 years, and it is our hope that the relevant UN entities and troop-contributing countries will support this proposal. It is my pleasure to underscore that the United Nations and its leadership have been greatly appreciating the genuine contribution of peace-loving Mongolia to the UNPKO and the sacred cause of strengthening international peace and security and rendering full support to our proposals and initiatives. Mr. President, Mongolia has consistently proposed the establishment of a dialogue mechanism with the view to contribute to the peace and security in the Northeast Asian region and the efforts of the international community to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. In this context, in 2013, Mongolia has launched the initiative to organize the international conference on Ulaanbaatar Dialogue on Northeast Asian Security. Last June, we have organized the 7th International Conference of the Ulaanbaatar Dialogue on Northeast Asian Security and discussed a broad range of issues, including regional security, power grid, green development, opportunities for humanitarian cooperation, and the post-COVID economic recovery. The results of the conference demonstrate that the significance of the Ulaanbaatar Dialogue initiative has grown, and it is transforming into an open and inclusive mechanism gathering government officials and the academia from countries in the sub-region and beyond, and representatives of international organizations. In the face of frequent natural disasters and communicable disease, the creation of an integrated regional infrastructure for disaster risk reduction and humanitarian assistance is becoming one of the most pressing security issues in Northeast Asia. With this in mind, we put forward an initiative to establish an integrated platform for disaster risk reduction for the Northeast Asian region in Mongolia in 2018, and now we're bringing forward a proposal to establish a regional humanitarian hub or warehouse based on the Ulaanbaatar International Airport affiliated facilities. I'm confident that these initiatives will be supported and assisted by other countries in the region and the UN system and specialized organizations. Mr. President, broad-scale economic restrictions and sanctions caused by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and geopolitical conflicts have hit hard the national economies. The global market prices of food, fuel, agriculture, and energy raw materials have increased sharply like never before, causing fluctuation in the global economy and financial markets and creating major risks. With the immediate support of the United Nations and its system organizations and development partners to Mongolia's effort against COVID-19, as of today, 70% of the Mongolian populations are fully vaccinated, domestic restrictions removed, and borders opened. Though we're going through an uneasy period, the government of Mongolia is implementing the new recovery policy developed in coherence with the Sustainable Development Goals. The policy focuses on improvement of road, railway, and border point infrastructure, increase of energy resources, intensification of industrialization, as well as urban and rural development and enhancement of public-private partnership and productivity. Furthermore, despite tough times of the pandemic and new normalcy, Mongolia is putting effort to accelerate the digital transition and adopted a package of new laws on digital development. We have introduced the e-Mongolia platform to streamline public service delivery to citizens and entities, to reduce corruption and bureaucracy, to increase information security, and to promote good governance. Moreover, we're working to expand and develop our mutual multilateral cooperation in these fields at regional and international levels. Mongolia fully supports major initiatives put forward in the UN Secretary General's report, Our Common Agenda, and is sparing no effort to implement them in close cooperation with the Sustainable Development Goals, the National Vision 2050 Long-Term Development Policy, and the New Recovery Policy. Mr. President, we must not forget that serious challenges we are facing, such as climate change, biodiversity loss, desertification, land degradation, shortage of water resources, and droughts, are still awaiting solutions. Mongolia is one of the countries most affected by climate change. Therefore, with a view to combat climate change, desertification, and dust storms, and to increase forest and water resources, Mongolia launched the Billion Trees National Movement to plant, grow, and protect billions of trees. Mongolian people, the government, and development partners welcomed the initiative, and now the Billion Trees National Movement is being successfully implemented throughout the country. I'm pleased to inform that the UN Secretary General personally joined and supported the movement. In addition, Mongolia reiterates its position to actively cooperate and make a real contribution to reduce the negative impact of climate change and protecting the environment at regional and international levels. In this context, it is my pleasure to inform that Mongolia will be hosting the 17th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention to Combat Desertification in 2026. Another issue which should be brought to the attention is the scarcity of pastures, as the space for nomadic livestock is shrinking day by day, and nomadic civilization is facing a danger of extinction. We, Mongolians, are nomadic and pastoralist people, lives of over 200 million people raising livestock and living in harmony with the nature like us are at risk due to climate change, land degradation, desertification, drought, and extreme winter calamities. In order to protect their interests, improve pasture management and use, preserve ecosystem balance, and provide global food security and supply, Mongolia initiated a resolution proclaiming the year of 2026 as the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists, and it was adopted by the UNGA on March 15, 2022. We launched the Billion Trees National Movement along with the national programs on food supply and security and healthy Mongolia to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and create a healthy environment where people would live a healthy life, consuming healthy food. We highly appreciate the support and cooperation of the countries and the region and international organizations extended to these endeavors. Mr. President, nowadays the drastic change of the international order and norms established after the Second World War, the importance of multilateralism and the role of international community are growing further even more. For this reason, we are of the view that it is important for every member state to take an active part in the process of the UN reforms and constructively contribute to strengthening the position and role of the organization. Mongolia views that the key to the reform of the UN is the reform of Security Council, which bears the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Since 2009, Mongolia has been regularly participating in the intergovernmental negotiations on the UN Security Council reform, expressing its principal positions. Developments in recent years have proven that the UN General Assembly is the most important platform for discussing global peace, security, human rights, and development issues. So we deem that strengthening the role of UN General Assembly is important to ensure the balance of power among countries and bring out voices of small and developing countries more vividly. Lastly, I wish to call upon the member states to support the UN Quintet of Change outlined in the Secretary General's support our common agenda for the more effective UN 2.0, and let us collectively exert efforts to ensure global peace, security, development, and prosperity. May the eternal blue sky bless us, the mankind, forever. Thank you for your attention.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, je tiens à remercier le président de la Mongolie pour son allocution.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Mongolia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
On behalf
of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates. The Secretary General's landmark report, Our Common Agenda, has only grown in value since it was launched 1 year ago. The world is in a state of turbulence with intersecting crises growing in scale and severity, including climate change, food price inflation, conflict, and uncontrolled migration. These challenges all require multilateral cooperation and efforts, yet the perception that the international system is no longer up to the task has only deepened, particularly where the interests of powerful members are at stake. In the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, recent setbacks have served to highlight that the security situation is fundamentally no different than it was 20 years ago, when the largest and most expensive United Nations peacekeeping mission was first deployed. This has exposed neighboring states, notably Rwanda, to cross-border attacks that are entirely preventable. There is an urgent need to find the political will to finally address the root causes of instability in eastern DRC. The blame game does not solve the problems. These challenges are not insurmountable, and solutions can be found. This would ultimately be much less costly in terms of both money and human lives. Despite shortcomings, there are examples to demonstrate that international cooperation can successfully address the issues that matter to all of us. Global health is a case in point. The Global Fund to fight HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria has helped save countless lives in Africa and beyond, while also strengthening health systems. I hope that all countries will respond strongly and sustain their commitments at the 7th Global Fund replenishment session, chaired by President Biden later today. Africa is doing its part, but must do more. For sustainability, external funding must go hand in hand with increased domestic financing for health. This is a priority which the African Union is tracking on an annual basis, and which I'm honored to lead on behalf of the organization. We are also working with partners to bring end-to-end vaccine manufacturing to our continent, notably through collaboration with BioNTech and strong support from the European Union. This is critical to increase Africa's resilience against future pandemics. I commend the Secretary General for convening the Transforming Education Summit earlier this week. The future of billions of children and young people across the world depends on overcoming the challenges of inclusion and quality of instruction, particularly as we recover from the pandemic. Away from the headlines, the United Nations and other multilateral institutions retained the ability to set an agenda around which we can all rally. At the recent Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Kigali, leaders adopted an ambitious program of action, including special instruments on living lands, sustainable urbanization, and child care protection and reform. We also agreed to prioritize public-private partnerships to create digital jobs for young people across the Commonwealth. The future is digital, and transformation is happening now, as evidenced by ongoing work of the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development and the Smart Africa Secretariat. High-quality digital jobs are a practical response to the underlying drivers of irregular migration by closing the human capital investment gap that separates high and low income countries. To ensure that the benefits are equally shared, we must continue investing equitably in emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. In the area of peace building and counterterrorism, regional initiatives can complement the important work of the United Nations. Regional and bilateral initiatives have been proven to make a big difference, whether in the Central African Republic or the successful engagement to contain violent extremism in northern Mozambique, conducted by Rwanda and the Southern African Development Community. If this approach were tried properly in DRC, as proposed by the Nairobi process, it would make difference. However, to be sustainable, such efforts require consistent financial support from the international community. A lot is at stake, and time is not on our side. We cannot anticipate or prevent every crisis, but we can be better prepared to react quickly and effectively when needed, especially if we work together. I thank you for your kind attention.
On
behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Rwanda for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
The
Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Sefik Zaferovic, Chair of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Sefik Zaferovic, Chair of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to address this esteemed body as the Chairman of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I congratulate Mr. Shahid on successfully presiding over the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Despite the difficult working conditions caused by the pandemic, he worked dedicatedly with the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, so that this body of the United Nations could carry out its duties. I also congratulate Mr. Qureshi on his election as the President of the 77th session of the UN General Assembly. You can count on the support and cooperation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in ensuring the productive work of this body. Dear President, at the recent sessions of the General Assembly and under international fora, we regularly assess that the global order is experiencing tectonic changes. Today, however, we can conclude that the world has changed irreversibly. international relations that the security architecture of Europe used to rest on, as well as the wider international framework, are now a thing of the past. At a time when towns and villages in Ukraine are facing the terrifying reality of war, the least we can do is not to be silent about it. We must not be silent, especially not in this building, the home of the United Nations, established with the aim of preventing and stopping what is currently happening in Ukraine. We must not be silent in Bosnia and Herzegovina either. We owe that to our vivid memories of the horrors of war and aggression. The United Nations system was unable to prevent or stop the war in my country in the period between 1992 and 1995. Unfortunately, that happened again with Ukraine. I am primarily referring to the Security Council here, the body responsible for the protection of international peace and security in light of the principles defined by the Charter of the United Nations. The Security Council, due to internal relations and blockade, is evidently unable to fulfill its obligations. However, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution on aggression against Ukraine by an overwhelming majority. That resolution confirmed the undisputed principles of the Charter of the United Nations and other acts of international law, which prohibit the use of armed force. It orders states to resolve disagreements by peaceful means. The resolution expresses support for territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Unequivocally, it refers to the actions of the Russian Federation as aggression. It calls for the aggression to stop. Finally, it rejects secessionist moves of certain regions within Ukraine directed against its territorial integrity. Bosnia and Herzegovina supported this resolution and stood on the right side of history, along with other 140 countries. This is in line with the obligations stemming from the UN Charter, our previously held positions, and our obligation, according to the Stabilization and Association Agreement, to follow the foreign policy of the United Nations. European Union. Although this resolution does not have the power to stop the war, it does have the power to stop the lies. The clear and unambiguous language of this highest international forum extremely reduces the space for those who try to relativize the truth. The first step towards any solution is to tell and respect the truth. I hope that there will be peace as soon as possible, so that people in Ukraine can live normal lives, and so that the displaced can return to their homes. Respected President, the war in Ukraine, as well as the consequences of the pandemic, led to drastic changes in all spheres of life. That is currently very visible in a deep energy crisis, inflation, a general recession, and the threat to supplies, especially in the food sector. We are all facing a very difficult and challenging winter. Global markets and international free trade enabled enormous progress in all corners of the world. Eradication of hunger, availability of consumer goods, and continuous economic growth in all parts of the world, those are all unquestionable benefits of global economic liberalization. Globalization tightly connected various parts of the globe and made us interdependent. Strong economic, security, and political interrelations produced an increasingly integrated global framework. Within that framework, everyone relies on one another in different spheres, from economy to security. At the same time, the interdependence of different parts of the world is the source of vulnerability of our global community. That became obvious during the pandemic, when traffic and supply channels were blocked. It is also obvious in the light of the current crisis related to the war in Ukraine. Due to the blockade of wheat exports from Ukrainian ports, developing countries in Africa and Asia are facing hunger. A large part of the European continent is facing an energy crisis due to dependence on Russian gas. As a result of difficulties caused by the process of political and economic integration, in the past years we often witnessed strong advocacy of political sovereignty and economic protectionism. Consequences of transformation of developed countries from industrial to post-industrial nations, the migration, and most finally the pandemic, led many to call for the construction of economic and even literal walls and wire fences. That is a wrong path to take. The answer to the above problems is not closing. The answer is the opening. The solution is not less cooperation. The solution is the increased cooperation. The answer to the energy crisis in Europe caused by dependence on a single source is not only relying on one's own forces. The answer is diversification in finding new, multiple channels of gas supply and other energy sources. No one in the modern world has enough resources to be self-sustainable. Past crises show that dependence on individual external sources is not enough either. We can only overcome those difficulties by increasing our internal cooperation. Respected President, we live in unstable times, unprecedented in recent history. As we face an extremely difficult winter, we are aware of the destabilizing potential of the current economic and energy crisis. 20th century provides extremely valuable lessons about the correlation between economic crisis and right-wing populism. Nazi movement came to power on the wave of great economic depression. That led to the greatest cataclysm in the history of mankind. After that, the United Nations was established, the UN Charter was adopted, as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and other UN acts. The essential idea of the United Nations is the idea of the equality of all people, regardless of their origin, skin color, religion, national or other affiliation. All the previously referenced fundamental acts of international law are based on this idea. Modern civilization was built on that idea. Today, almost 8 decades later, we can hear voices openly or implicitly denying those fundamental tenets. Right-wing populists more and more often say that all people and nations do not have equal rights, that some are more valuable than others. It is becoming increasingly frequent that they openly advocate the ideas of ethnic and racial supremacy and claim that domination and brute force are the only principles on which interpersonal and international relations can and should be structured. It only takes one step from those ideas to violence. From this place, from the United Nations building, I call for caution and action. We will face enormous challenges in the coming period. We must fulfill our duty and fight for civilizational ideas. At all costs, we must defend those ideas. Respected President, Bosnia and Herzegovina has been home to many peoples, cultures and religions for centuries. Our long tradition of multiculturalism is something we take pride in. We are proud of our Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Roma and other communities, as well as the culture of living together and mutual respect that we have developed over the centuries. All those communities, individually and collectively, make the structure of the mosaic of the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is the way things are, and that is how things will remain. At the same time, Bosnia and Herzegovina as a meeting place of cultures was a thorn in the side of policies based on the idea of the impossibility of living together and the necessity of confrontation. Such policies led to the terrifying war in Bosnia and Herzegovina from 1992 to 1995. That war culminated in the genocide in Srebrenica. Resolutions from that period, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council, as well as the reports of the UN Secretary-General and the judgments of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, qualify the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina as an international armed conflict in which neighboring countries participated. The judgments passed by the Hague Criminal Tribunal conclude the joint criminal enterprises took place. The goal of those enterprises was the elimination of certain ethnic groups from parts of the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, so that those territories would ultimately be annexed to neighboring countries. This was the most serious violation of international general and humanitarian law. Bosnia and Herzegovina has gone through an arduous peace-building process since the conclusion of the Dayton Peace Agreement. However, we still face numerous challenges. Some of the major challenges are certain policies in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the neighborhood which have never abandoned the wartime goals of dividing our country. There are parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina that are part of the broad wave of right-wing populism in Europe. They openly claim that Bosnia and Herzegovina is not sustainable because, according to them, it is not possible for Muslims and Christians to live together. Muslims and Christians live and can live together. That life does have a perspective. What certainly has no perspective are retrograde policies that oppose such life. Bosnia and Herzegovina has a centuries-old history and is a living example and proof of the civilizational idea that people of different religions, nations and cultures can live together. The fact is that Bosnia and Herzegovina, even despite the war aimed at its destruction, managed to survive. That shows the exceptional resilience of my country. Majority of people in Bosnia and Herzegovina want to live in peace with their differences. There is enough strength for such Bosnia and Herzegovina to persevere. I am convinced that that will be the case. Respected President, the experience of Bosnia and Herzegovina shows that the rule of law is a crucial factor of peace building. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, formed by the UN, granted the victims the minimum of justice. It sent a message to criminals that their actions will not go unpunished and that they will be brought to justice and face the consequences for their actions. Moreover, there were other international community bodies that made a huge contribution to the building and the protection of peace, primarily the Office of the High Representative and the Peace Implementation Council. Both of those bodies were established on the basis of Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which mandates the intervention of the international community in order to protect peace. The establishment of those bodies was also confirmed by the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. Consequently, the closure of those bodies is possible only following a new decision of the UN Security Council. It's not time for that yet. Please allow me to remind you of the international supervision that was present in some significantly developed countries, such as Germany's, with even greater executive powers than the Office of the High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That supervision was ended after 45 years of existence, only once the necessary prerequisites for that were created. The Office of the High Representative and the Peace Implementation Council have been helping domestic political actors to implement reforms for the past 27 years. Through joint efforts, we managed to unite the three once warring armies into a single armed forces. We also united the three intelligence services, tax systems, judiciaries, etc. Thanks to those reforms and the existence of the armed forces and other state institutions of Bosnia and Herzegovina, even after the gradual withdrawal of 60,000 international troops from Bosnia and Herzegovina, the peace remained intact. The past year brought attacks against the 27 years of implementation of the Dayton Peace Agreement. In particular, there was an attempt to disband state institutions established on the basis of the clear provisions of the Dayton Peace Agreement. Thanks to the action of the Office of the High Representative and the Peace Implementation Council member states led by the United States of America, the attack on state institutions was stopped and peace was preserved once again. That demonstrated the expediency and efficiency of the international community institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There have been requests for the closure of the Office of the High Representative in the past. More recently, there were frequent requests that the High Representative take steps that would weaken the unity of Bosnia and Herzegovina and introduce additional ethnic divisions. According to the Dayton Peace Agreement and the UN Charter, it is the obligation of the High Representative to protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina and not to contribute contributed to its disintegration. Respected President, in addition to the civilian international presence in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is also the international military in the country, specifically the EUFOR mission and the NATO headquarters with a total of 1,100 troops. Bosnia and Herzegovina is not special in that regard. Many more developed sovereign states need the presence of international military forces in much larger numbers than is the case in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The international military presence was established by the Dayton Peace Agreement. UN Security Council confirms the EUFOR mission's mandate on an annual basis. The Security Council will vote on the EUFOR mandate again in less than 1 month. It is very important for the stability and peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region that this resolution is adopted. However, it is important to emphasize that in any case, according to the Dayton Peace Agreement, NATO has the right and obligation to deploy its forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina has made decisions in the past giving consent to the presence of EUFOR and NATO forces without any time limits. Those decisions are a sufficient legal basis for the presence of an international military mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina until the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina takes a different position. Respected President, Bosnia and Herzegovina's foreign policy goals are membership in the European Union and NATO. The June 2022 session of the European Council opened up the space for granting Bosnia and Herzegovina the status of a candidate for membership in the European Union if certain conditions are met. Bosnia and Herzegovina has recently made certain progress in terms of fulfilling the 14 priorities defined in the opinion of the European Commission on Bosnia and Herzegovina's application for EU membership. We fulfilled some of the said priorities in full and some partially. I'm pleased to say that in the past weeks we have continued meeting those priorities. I expect that we will continue making even more progress after the general elections that will take place on October 2nd next month. I also expect Bosnia and Herzegovina to be granted the EU membership candidate status as soon as possible. Regarding our relations with NATO, Bosnia and Herzegovina is part of the membership action plan. In terms of reforms that NATO expects from us as an aspirant country, the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina adopted the reform program, which is our annual obligation. Respected President, regional cooperation is one of the foreign policy goals of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina wants good relations with its neighbors, with mutual appreciation, respect, and also the principle of reciprocity. That is the only way to build relations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. Everyone in our region must understand that the geostrategic and geopolitical configuration of the region is completed. The path to security and prosperity is the path of mutual cooperation and solving the open issues in accordance with the principles of international law. We are all equal in the region. No one can dominate anyone else. We all need peace and stability. Respected President, the whole world needs peace and stability. All current disputes in the world should be resolved on the principles of international law with the involvement of the international judicial institutions. That is why it is very important to strengthen multilateral mechanisms and institutions. Therefore, I believe that the strength and authority of the UN as a key multilateral mechanism must be fortified. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Chair of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly, we are here, the address by His Excellency Chandrika Persad Santokhi, President of the Republic of Suriname. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Chandrika Persad Santokhi, President of the Republic of Suriname, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Good morning, President of the General Assembly, Xaba Korosi, Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, colleague heads, heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, I congratulate you on your election to preside over the 76th 7th session of this august body, and I assure you of my country's full support during your presidency. Mr. President, at last year's general debate, I called on leaders to build a better world, a planet for those living today, but more so for those generations yet to come. So today, I would like to take you back to 1992, when Stephen Suzuki spoke at the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. She appealed to everyone to help stop the destruction of the Earth's resources. And now, 2022, we are here. The current state of the world does not need another wake-up call. It is time for real action. And while some progress has been made, we have not yet been successful in overcoming the challenges. Meanwhile, the threats have been adding up. Economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic slowed. Worsening climate crisis with extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, and ecosystems collapse, increasing levels of poverty and hunger, and yes, a humanitarian crisis. The global community is faced with escalating consumer and fuel prices that have risen substantially, damaging living standards, particularly for the vulnerable. Therefore, I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, have we treated our Earth in a sustainable way? Are we better prepared for the next pandemic? Has access to climate financing improved? Have we addressed the root causes for the humanitarian crisis and unregulated migration? Have we ensured that the most vulnerable in our societies were lifted out of poverty and hunger? And have we provided for their needs? And we are taking enough actions together as one? Mr. President, Secretary General, colleague heads, we all can conclude that we are not ready and have not taken all the necessary measures. And as leader of my country, Suriname, a small country, one of only 3 carbon-negative countries in the world, I appeal to you today, let us uphold our firm commitment to international principles and international law by all when addressing the global challenges and threats. Today, I urge the United Nations to exert its important role and place in defense of these principles through meaningful dialogue and constructive engagement as tools. These developments will take us further from our shared objectives in 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the promise of leaving no one behind. Mr. President, no country is immune to the climate crisis. Over the past months, Suriname has been affected by excessive rainfall, resulting in floods in many parts of the country. Due to the inflow of salt water, fertile agricultural land was adversely affected, causing economic loss and impacting food security and rural livelihoods. The Secretary General visited Suriname, and during his visit in July this year, he witnessed firsthand the impact climate change, particularly the climate change effect on the low-lying coastal states. He lauded our nature-based solution, such as preserving mangroves rainforests, and other essential ecosystems. And he stated, the Caribbean is ground zero for the global climate emergency. Mr. President, that is why it is time to act now. We have delivered the $100 billion commitment in climate finance for adaptation. As such, we call for support for a research agenda that will help the region understand the cost of climate change on sectors and economies. Scaling up the means of implementation, including finance, particularly adaptation finance, capacity building, and technology transfer, and not technology dumping. Scaling up finance for adaptation and for response to loss and damage, with prioritization for Caribbean SIDS to access grant and concessionary finance, including through bilateral channels in particular. The establishment of a loss and damage facility under the UNFCCC that would provide SIDS with resources to finance loss and damage resulting from climate change. In this regard, I express appreciation to the Secretary General of the United Nations for his efforts to make the Adaptation Fund more accessible to countries affected by climate change through his Adaptation Finance Initiative. Mr. President, finance is the backbone of sustainable development. The time has come, and the time is now, for a real reform of the global financial architecture, a reform that must take into consideration the unique and inherent vulnerabilities that hamper the ability of small and vulnerable economies to overcome economic, environmental, and social shocks. I therefore welcome the appointment of the high-level panel on multidimensional vulnerability index, and we look forward to finding solutions to address the obstacles to realizing the index, in particular the availability of reliable data. Mr. President, the political, economic, and humanitarian crisis in Haiti remains a great concern to the region and requires the attention of the international community. In my capacity as current CARICOM chair, I am committed to exerting all efforts for a dialogue with all stakeholders in Haiti aimed at safeguarding peace and security. It is of utmost importance that any support in resolving the situation in Haiti should be on the basis of a Haitian-supported and owned plan. Conflicts and violence are currently on the rise globally in all regions, which are leading to hostilities and displacements. These hostilities and mass displacements are causing people to face paralyzing levels of poverty and food insecurity. We as member states constituting the United Nations should take up our role in maintaining international peace and security. The achievement of sustainable development is inextricably linked to upholding democratic values, good governance, and respect for human rights. We must allow countries to develop sustainable economies without obstacles. Mr. President, in today's world, differences must be resolved through dialogue and cooperation. Therefore, in our view, the long-standing embargo against Cuba and the Cuban people must be lifted. I believe, Mr. President, that young people are valuable and undeniable partners in every development aspect and in shaping the future. Let me also congratulate the General Secretariat for the establishment of a youth office in the United Nations Secretariat. As lead head within the quasi-cabinet of the Caribbean community responsible for regional youth development, I was pleased with the interaction of region's youth during the last CARICOM leaders meeting held in Suriname. I commend them for taking the responsibility and inspiring their peers to not only demand a seat at the table, but also show up consistently. On my part, Mr. President, I have pledged 10 hectares of land in Suriname for setting up an innovative campus where students and startups from the region will be facilitated to conduct research and development studies. Mr. President, since I took office 2 years ago, my government has been making efforts to bring the economy back on track and bring the development of the country on the right path from an extremely unsustainable position. While a homegrown recovery plan, a 36-month extended fund facility of the IMF, and a national multi-year development plan are in implementation, my government continues to face economic challenges and capacity constraints due to external and unforeseen shocks. Based on the impact of several crises and the measure to reform the economy, the population is going through the hardship now. Therefore, international support in this regard is of utmost importance. Mr. President, to avoid further hardships and to bring some relief to the population, we have taken a decision to re-engage with the IMF to consider where the program can be adjusted to implement the program based on the current realities in the world and to minimize the social costs of this program. We appreciate bilateral and multilateral partners who have expressed solidarity and have provided valuable support to my country and people during these challenging times. Additionally, our goal is to attract investment, to improve productivity and capital allocation, which are critical for growth and poverty reduction. In conclusion, Mr. President, Secretary General, colleague heads, effective and consensus-based multilateralism is the only option for solving the interlocking challenges our world faces today. National solutions to resolve global problems have time and again proven to be ineffective and at times dangerous. Through global solutions with adapted local or national implementation, we should achieve the future we want. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, together we can, together we will, together we have, and together we are stronger. I thank you, and may God bless you all. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Suriname for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States of America. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States of America, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, my fellow leaders, in the last year, our world has experienced great upheaval. A growing crisis in food insecurity, record heat, floods and droughts, COVID-19, inflation, and a brutal, needless war. A war chosen by one man, to be very blunt. Let us speak plainly. A permanent member of the United Nations Security Council invaded its neighbor, attempted to erase a sovereign state from the map. Russia has shamelessly violated the core tenets of the United Nations Charter. No more important than the clear prohibition against countries taking the territory of their neighbor by force. Again, just today, President Putin has made overt nuclear threats against Europe and a reckless disregard for the responsibilities of the non-proliferation regime. Now, Russia's calling up more soldiers to join the fight, and the Kremlin is organizing a sham referenda to try to annex parts of Ukraine, an extremely significant violation of the UN Charter. This world should see these outrageous acts for what they are. Putin claims he had to act because Russia was threatened. But no one threatened Russia, and no one other than Russia sought conflict. In fact, we warned it was coming, and with many of you we worked to try to avert it. Putin's own words make his true purpose unmistakable. Just before he invaded, Putin asserted, and I quote, "Ukraine was created by Russia and never had, quote, real statehood." And now we see attacks on schools, railway stations, hospitals, on centers of Ukrainian history and culture. In the past, even more horrifying evidence of Russia's atrocity and war crimes. Mass graves uncovered in Izium, bodies, according to those who excavated those bodies, showing signs of torture. This war is about extinguishing Ukraine's right to exist as a state, plain and simple, and Ukraine's right to exist as a people. Whoever you are, wherever you live, whatever you believe, that should make your blood run cold. That's why 141 nations in the General Assembly came together and to unequivocally condemn Russia's war against Ukraine. The United States has marshaled massive levels of security assistance and humanitarian aid and direct economic support for Ukraine. More than $25 billion to date. Our allies and partners around the world have stepped up as well. And today, more than 40 countries represented in here have contributed billions of their own money and equipment to help Ukraine defend itself. The United States is also working closely with our allies and partners to impose costs on Russia, to deter attacks against NATO territory, to hold Russia accountable for the atrocities and war crimes. Because if nations can pursue their imperial ambitions without consequences, then we put at risk everything this very institution stands for, everything. Every victory won on the battlefield belongs to the courageous Ukrainian soldiers. But this past year, the world was tested as well. And we did not hesitate. We chose liberty. We chose sovereignty. We chose principles to which every party to the United Nations Charter is beholding. We stood with Ukraine. Like you, the United States wants this war to end on just terms, on terms we all signed up for, that you cannot seize a nation's territory by force, that the only country standing in the way of that is Russia. So we, each of us in this body, who's determined to uphold the principles and beliefs we pledge to defend as members of the United Nations, must be clear, firm, and unwavering in our resolve. Ukraine has the same rights that belong to every sovereign nation. We will stand in solidarity with Ukraine. We will stand in solidarity against Russia's aggression, period. Now, it's no secret that in the contest between democracy and autocracy, the United States and I, as President, champion a vision for our world that's grounded in the values of democracy. The United States is determined to defend and strengthen democracy at home and around the world because I believe democracy remains humanity's greatest instrument to address the challenges of our time. We're working with the G7 and like-minded countries to prove democracies can deliver for their citizens, but also deliver for the rest of the world as well. But as we meet today, the UN Charter's very basis of a stable and just rule-based order is under attack by those who wish to tear it down or distort it for their own political advantage. And the United Nations Charter was not only signed by democracies of the world, it was negotiated among citizens, dozens of nations with vastly different histories and ideologies, united in their commitment to work for peace. As President Truman said in 1945, the UN Charter, and I quote, is proof that nations like men can state their differences, can face them, and then can find common ground on which to stand, end of quote. That common ground was so straightforward, so basic, that today 193 of you, 193 member states have willingly embraced its principles. And standing up for those principles for the UN Charter is the job of every responsible member state. I reject the use of violence and war to conquer nations or expand borders through bloodshed, to stand against global politics of fear and coercion, to defend the sovereign rights of smaller nations as equal to those of larger ones, to embrace basic principles like freedom of navigation, respect for international law, and arms control. No matter what else we may disagree on, that is the common ground upon which we must stand. If you're still committed to a strong foundation for the good of every nation around the world, then the United States wants to work with you. I also believe the time has come for this institution to become more inclusive so that it can better respond to the needs of today's world. Members of the UN Security Council, including the United States, should consistently uphold and defend the UN Charter and refrain from the use of the veto, except in rare, extraordinary situations, to ensure that the Council remains credible and effective. That is also why the United States supports increasing the number of both permanent and non-permanent representatives of the Council. This includes permanent seats for those nations we have long supported and permanent seats for countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. The United States is committed to this vital work. In every region, we've pursued new, constructive ways to work with partners to advance shared interests, from elevating the Quad in the Indo-Pacific to signing the Los Angeles Declaration of Migration and Protection at the Summit of the Americas, to joining a historic meeting of 9 Arab leaders to work toward a more peaceful, integrated Middle East, to hosting the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in this December. As I said last year, the United States is opening an era of relentless diplomacy to address the challenges that matter most to people's lives, all people's lives. Tackling climate crisis, as the previous speaker spoke to, strengthening global health security, feeding the world. We made that priority And 1 year later, we're keeping that promise. From the day I came to office, we've led with bold climate agenda. We rejoined the Paris Agreement, convened the major climate summits, helped deliver critical agreements on the COP26. We helped get 2/3 of the world's GDP on track to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And now, I've signed a historic piece of legislation here in the United States that includes the biggest, most important climate commitment we have ever made in the history of our country, $369 billion toward climate change. That includes tens of billions in new investments in offshore wind and solar, doubling down on zero-emission vehicles, increasing energy efficiency, supporting clean manufacturing. Our Department of Energy estimates that this new law will reduce U.S. emissions by 1 gigaton a year by 2030, while unleashing a new era of clean energy-powered economic growth. Our investments will also help reduce the cost of developing clean energy technologies worldwide, not just in the United States. This is a global game changer, and none too soon. We don't have much time. We all know we're already living in a climate crisis. No one seems to doubt it after this past year. We meet. Much of Pakistan is still underwater, needs help. Meanwhile, the Horn of Africa faces unprecedented drought. Families are facing impossible choices, choosing which child to feed and wondering whether they'll survive. This is the human cost of climate change, and it's growing, not lessening. So, as I announced last year, to meet our global responsibility, my administration is working with our Congress to deliver more than $11 billion a year to international climate finance, to help lower-income countries implement their climate goals and ensure a just energy transition. The key part of that will be our PEPFAR plan, which will help 500 million people in especially vulnerable countries adapt to the impacts of climate change and build resilience. This need is enormous. So let this be the moment we find within ourselves the will to turn back the tide of climate devastation, and unlock a resilient, sustainable, clean energy economy to preserve our planet. On global health, we've delivered more than 620 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine to 116 countries around the world, with more available to help meet countries' needs. All free of charge, no strings attached, and we're working closely with the G20 and other countries in the United States help lead the change to establish a groundbreaking new fund for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response at the World Bank. At the same time, we've continued to advance the ball on enduring global health challenges. Later today, I'll host the 7th replenishment conference for the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. With bipartisan support in our Congress, I have pledged to contribute up to $6 billion to that effort. So I look forward to welcoming a historic round of pledges at the conference, resulting in one of the largest global health fundraisers ever held in all history. We're also taking down the food crisis head on, with as many as 193 million people around the world experience acute food insecurity, a jump of 40 million in a year. Today I'm announcing another $2.9 billion in U.S. support for life-saving humanitarian and food security assistance for this year alone. Russia, in the meantime, is pumping out lies, trying to pin the blame for the crisis, the food crisis, on the sanctions imposed by many in the world for the aggression against Ukraine. So let me be perfectly clear about something. Our sanctions explicitly allow Russia the ability to export food and fertilizer. No limitation It's Russia's war that is worsening food insecurity, and only Russia can end it. I'm grateful for the work here at the UN, including your leadership, Mr. Secretary General, establishing a mechanism to export grain from Black Sea ports in Ukraine that Russia had blocked for months, and we need to make sure it's extended. We believe strongly in the need to feed the world. That's why the United States is the world's largest supporter of the World Food Program, with more than 40% of its budget. We're the leading support of the UNICEF efforts to feed children around the world. To take on a larger challenge of food insecurity, the United States introduced a call to action, a roadmap eliminating global food insecurity, that more than 100 nation member states have already supported. In June, the G7 announced more than $4.5 billion to strengthen food security around the world through USAID's Feed the Future initiative. The United States is scaling up innovative ways to get drought and heat-resistant seeds into the hands of farmers who need them, while distributing fertilizer and improving fertilizer efficiency so that farmers can grow more while using less. And we're calling on all countries to refrain from banning food exports or hoarding grain while so many people are suffering. Because in every country in the world, no matter what else divides us, if parents cannot feed their children, nothing else matters. If parents cannot feed their children. As we look to the future, we're working with our partners to update and create rules of the road for new challenges we face in the 21st century. We launched the Trade and Technology Council with the European Union to ensure that key technologies are developed and governed in the way that benefits everyone. With our partner countries and through the UN, we're supporting and strengthening the norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, and working to hold accountable those who use cyber attacks to threaten international peace and security. With partners in the Americas, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific, we're working to build a new economic ecosystem where every nation gets a fair shot, and economic growth is resilient, sustainable, and shared. That's why the United States has championed a global minimum tax, and we will work to see it implemented so major corporations pay their fair share everywhere. It's also been the idea behind the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which the United States launched this year with 13 other Indo-Pacific economies. We're working with our partners in ASEAN and the Pacific Islands to support a vision for a critical Indo-Pacific region that is free and open, connected and prosperous, secure and resilient. Together with partners around the world, we're working to secure resilient supply chains that protect everyone from coercion or domination, and ensure that no country can use energy as a weapon. And as Russia's war riles the global economy, we're also calling on major global creditors, including the non-Paris Club countries, to transparently negotiate debt forgiveness for lower-income countries, to forestall broader economic and political crisis around the world. Instead of infrastructure projects that generated huge and large debt without delivering on the promised advantages, let's meet the enormous infrastructure needs around the world with transparent investments, high-standard projects that protect the rights of workers and the environment, keyed to the needs of the communities they serve, not to the contributor. That's why the United States, together with fellow G7 partners, launched a Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. We intend to collectively mobilize $600 billion in investment through this partnership by 2027. Dozens of projects are already underway. Industrial-scale vaccine manufacturing in Senegal, transformative solar projects in Angola, first-of-its-kind small modular nuclear power plant in Romania. These are investments that are going to deliver returns not just for those countries, but for everyone. The United States will work with every nation, including our competitors, to solve global problems like climate change. Climate diplomacy is not a favor to the United States or any other nation, and walking away hurts the entire world. Let me be direct about the competition between the United States and China. As we manage shifting geopolitical trends, the United States will conduct itself as a reasonable leader. We do not seek conflict. We do not seek a Cold War. We do not ask any nation to choose between the United States or any other partner. But the United States will be unabashed in promoting our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous world and what we have to offer communities of nations. Investments that are designed not to foster dependency, but to alleviate burdens and help nations become self-sufficient. Partnerships not to create political obligation, but because we know our own success. Each of our successes increased when other nations succeed as well. When individuals have the chance to live in dignity and develop their talents, everyone benefits. Critical to that is living up to the highest goals of this institution, increasing peace and security for everyone, everywhere. The United States will not waver in our unrelenting determination to counter and thwart the continuing terrorist threats to our world. And we will lead with our diplomacy to strive for peaceful resolution of conflicts. We seek to uphold peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. We remain committed to our One China policy, which has helped prevent conflict for 4 decades. And we continue to oppose unilateral changes in the status quo by either side. We support an African Union-led peace process to end the fighting in Ethiopia, restore security for all its people. In Venezuela, where years of political oppression have driven more than 6 million people from that country, we urge the Venezuelan-led dialogue and return to free and fair elections. We continue to stand with our neighbor in Haiti as it faces political, fueled gang violence and an enormous human crisis. And we call on the world to do the same. We have more to do. We'll continue to back the UN-mediated truce in Yemen, which has delivered precious months of peace to people that have suffered years of war. And we will continue to advocate for lasting negotiating peace between the Jewish and Democratic State of Israel and the Palestinian people. The United States is committed to Israel's security, full stop. And a negotiated 2-state solution remains, in our view, the best way to ensure Israel's security and prosperity for the future and give the Palestinians the state to which they are entitled. Both sides to fully respect the equal rights of their citizens. Both people enjoying equal measure of freedom and dignity. Let me also urge every nation to recommit to strengthening the nuclear non-proliferation regime through diplomacy. No matter what else is happening in the world, the United States is ready to pursue critical arms control measures. A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council just reaffirmed that commitment in January. But today, we're seeing disturbing trends. Russia shunned the non-proliferation ideals embraced by every other nation at the 10th NPT Review Conference. And again today, as I said, they're making irresponsible nuclear threats to use nuclear weapons. China is conducting an unprecedented, concerning nuclear buildup without any transparency. Despite our efforts to begin serious and sustained diplomacy, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea continues to blatantly violate UN sanctions. And while the United States is prepared for a mutual return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action if Iran steps up to its obligations, the United States is clear. We will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. I continue to believe that diplomacy is the best way to achieve this outcome. The non-proliferation regime is one of the greatest successes of this institution. We cannot let the world now slide backwards, nor can we turn a blind eye to the erosion of human rights. Perhaps singular among this body's achievements stands the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the standard by which our forebears challenged us to measure ourselves. They made clear in 1948, human rights are the basis for all that we seek to achieve. And yet today, in 2022, fundamental freedoms are at risk in every part of our world, from the violations in Xinjiang, detailed recent reports by the Office of UN and U.S. reports detailing by the U.S. High Commissioner, to the horrible abuses against pro-democracy activists and ethnic minorities by the military regime in Burma, to the increased repression of women and girls by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And today, we stand with the brave citizens and the brave women of Iran who right now are demonstrating to secure their basic rights. But here's what I know. The future will be won by those countries that unleash the full potential of their populations, where women and girls can exercise equal rights, including basic reproductive rights, and contribute fully to building a stronger economies and more resilient societies, where religious and ethnic minorities can live their lives without harassment and contribute to the fabric of their communities, where the LGBTQ plus community, individuals, live and love freely without being targeted with violence, where citizens can question and criticize their leaders without fear of reprisal. The United States will always promote human rights and the values enshrined in the UN Charter in our own country and around the world. Let me end with this. This institution, guided by the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is at its core an act of dauntless hope. Let me say that again. It's an act of dauntless hope. Think about the vision of those first delegates who undertook a seemingly impossible task while the world was still smoldering. Think about how divided the people of the world must have felt with the fresh grief of millions dead, the genocidal horrors of the Holocaust exposed. They had every right to believe only the worst of humanity. Instead, they reached for what was best in all of us, and they strove to build family, cooperation for the advancement of all humankind. My fellow leaders, the challenges we face today are great indeed, but our capacity is greater. Our commitment must be greater still. So let's stand together to again declare the unmistakable resolve that nations of the world are united still, that we stand for the values of the UN Charter, that we still believe by working together we can bend the arc of history toward a freer and more just world for all our children, although none of us have fully achieved it. We're not passive witnesses to history. We are the authors of history. We can do this. We have to do it for ourselves and for our future, for humankind. Thank you for your tolerance, for listening to me. I appreciate it very much. God bless you all.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the United States of America for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. May I request representatives to remain seated while we suspend the meeting for 5 minutes before resuming to hear the next speaker.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, may I ask you to be seated? The meeting is resumed. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Egils Levits, President of Republic of Latvia. A request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Egils Levits, President of the Republic of Latvia, and to invite him to address the Assembly. Excellencies, I call for order. Please remain seated. Please go ahead, Your Excellency. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I confirm Latvia's readiness to cooperate constructively with you. Our agenda is full and still growing. To quote George Orwell, contrary to popular belief, the past was not more eventful than the present. Let me focus today on a few fundamental themes. First, the upholding of international law. International law is the basis for world peace order established by the United Nations Charter. At the core of this order is respect for the sovereignty of states and prohibition of the use of force. Starting a war of aggression is the gravest threat to our world peace order. Nevertheless, 7 months now, Russia has been waging an unprovoked and unjustified war against a sovereign UN member state, Ukraine. Let me stress, this is not just a regional security issue. Russia's military aggression against Ukraine threatens global security and stability. In the 21st century, Russia maintains a 19th century ideology of imperialism, colonialism, and racism. Russia invaded Georgia in 2008. It illegally annexed Ukraine's Crimea in 2014. It had used increasingly aggressive rhetoric towards other neighboring countries. These are all manifestations of its imperialistic and colonial ambitions. Denying another nation's right to exist, promoting the idea of supremacy of Russians and their special missionary role in the world. These are all contemporary expressions of racism. That is exactly the opposite of what the United Nations stands for. Mr. President, dear colleagues, Russia's war in Ukraine has caused a humanitarian disaster. A third of the Ukrainian population has been forced to leave their homes. Russia is preventing Ukrainian-grown food from reaching the world market. Also, Russia uses its position in the energy market to exert pressure. High energy prices maintain high levels of global inflation, which most dramatically affects the world's most vulnerable populations. Russia continues to spread false narratives about the cause of the global crisis in food, fuel, and finances. These lies must be overturned. Russia alone is responsible for this crisis. Mr. President, we, the law-abiding member states of the United Nations are responsible for supporting Ukraine's self-defense and stopping the aggressor. Russia's ability to finance the war against Ukraine must be limited. Global sanctions in the fields of finance, trade, transport and energy, as well as restrictive measures against individuals and legal entities, must be maintained and strengthened. Belarus, being equally responsible for enabling Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, is also being sanctioned. Since the beginning of the war, Latvia has spent over 0.8% of our GDP on military, economic, financial, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. We stand with the brave people of Ukraine. The heroic defense mounted by the people of Ukraine is bringing success. Today we learn the partial mobilization has been declared in Russia, as their once mighty army is overwhelmed. The blitzkrieg envisaged by President Putin has turned into a long nightmare. In another sign of desperation, Russia plans to hold illegal referenda in the coming days on the annexation of the occupied territories to the Russian Federation. This is a blatant contravention of both Ukrainian and international law. Latvia will not recognize the legitimacy of these referenda and their results. I call on the international community to do likewise. Mr. President, dear colleagues, impunity means invitation to further crimes. Therefore, the aggressor must be held accountable. The International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court have already started proceedings on particular aspects of Russia's war against Ukraine. The European Court of Human Rights has also initiated proceedings. However, a legal gap remains. No international court has jurisdiction over the main issue, the starting of a war of aggression, the gravest violation of the Charter of United Nations and international law. Therefore, I call for the establishment of a special tribunal. The main task of the special tribunal would be to investigate the responsibility of the Russian state in the crime of aggression. After the war, Russia will have to pay reparations to Ukraine for damages. The special tribunal could be part of an international reparations mechanism. The special tribunal could be established on the basis of a resolution of the General Assembly by another international organization or a group of like-minded states. Mr. President, let me now turn to the sustainable development and climate change issues. Agenda 2030 is a common roadmap for overcoming our challenges and creating future-oriented, sustainable and inclusive policies. This year, Latvia submitted to the United Nations its second progress report on sustainable development goals, highlighting the areas of education, gender equality, youth participation, and international cooperation. The implementation of Agenda 2030 is also the overarching goal of Latvia's development cooperation policy. Over the past 30 years, Latvia has developed expertise in democratic processes, good governance, socio-economic changes, and gender equality. Good governance, especially strengthening of the rule of law and democracy, accounts for the more than 40% of all support provided by Latvia. As a member of the Peacebuilding Commission, we are sharing our expertise on societal resilience. Joint efforts must also be continued to address the consequences of climate change, including through development cooperation efforts. For example, in Central Asia, Latvia has been working with the promotion of clean technologies. Particularly related to the protection of climate is the problem of global justice. Latvia supports the view that the greatest polluters should bear a greater burden for the protection of the climate. Latvia consequently advocates for more justice and for more solidarity on the global agenda. Mr. President, we are convinced that digitization is one of the most important agents of change. Latvia supports innovative and proven digital solutions that promotes the efficiency of public administration, public participation in decision-making, and the creation of new economic opportunities. Let me now highlight security and fundamental rights in digital space. The digital space is an integral part of our lives. It has enormous potential to contribute to the sustainable development of nations. Therefore, we must resist attempts to turn the digital space into a battlefield where international law is challenged and basic rights are ignored. Use of people's data in ways incompatible with their human dignity, rights, and security must be prevented. The global internet must be open, free, reliable, and secure. We support the proposal of the UN Secretary General to agree on a global digital compact, which should reduce the digital gap between the developed and developing countries. Both the COVID pandemic and current geopolitical challenges highlights the need to strengthen the resilience of society by combating disinformation, promoting media literacy, and strengthening media freedom. Accordingly, Latvia is actively preparing for the upcoming 11th Global Media Information Literacy Week. Critical thinking skills build our immunity to disinformation. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the aggression by a permanent member of the UN Security Council against another UN member state undermines the basic principles of the multilateral system that we have been building for decades. This situation once again confirms that a meaningful reform of the UN Security Council is necessary. As a first-time candidate for the Security Council in the 2025 elections, Latvia takes the responsibilities of membership very seriously. We will strive to make the Security Council more effective, accountable, coherent, and transparent. Latvia supports a more just, equitable representation by member states, notably from Africa. Mr. President, the Baltic states have much to contribute to the work of the United Nations. For us, the horrors of war, occupation, and harsh rule by a colonial power are within living memories. So is the fight for liberty and restored independence, and the transition to a successful, sustainable economy and the rule of law. We have no wish to dominate or intimidate anyone. We reject the idea of spheres of influence. As smaller states, we have an existential interest in effective multilateralism. Therefore, Latvia will continue to contribute to the work of the United Nations in the spirit of optimism and determination. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Latvia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Guillermo Lasso Mendoza, Constitutional President of the Republic of Ecuador. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Guillermo Lasso Mendoza, Constitutional President of the Republic of Ecuador, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, Excellencies,
at
the beginning of this year, a young man from Colombia, whose name is Mateo, was going about his daily student activities in the east of Europe. As many migrant Latin Americans, Mateo was focused on pursuing his dreams. In this case, he was pursuing his medical degree at the National University of Zaporizhia. However, on one day in February, this dream was transformed into a nightmare due to the absurd war of Russia against Ukraine. And while the whole world witnessed with horror the beginning of a war, the dimensions of which hadn't been seen in decades, Mateo actually experienced this in his own flesh. He found himself very close to the most dangerous military actions, and due to my respect for him and his traumatic experience, I prefer not to disclose these experiences. Now, using his own ingenuity as well as the solidarity of other people, Mateo made use of various means of transport, including on horseback, in order to go directly to the closest border. In the meantime, while all this was taking place in Ecuador, we were in the process of establishing a national crisis committee which fulfilled its goal of repatriating 730 Ecuadorian citizens on board of humanitarian flights. On one of these flights, Mateo managed to find a seat. His sister is Ecuadorian, and so that transforms him into part of our transnational family. His Colombian parents today reside in Ecuador thanks to special humanitarian visas that have been issued by our government. But it wasn't just Mateo. This same story was experienced by various Colombian, Peruvian, and other Latin American citizens, and even Ukrainians, who managed to escape the war thanks to this enormous diplomatic effort led by our country. I am telling you all this because if you take away just one message from me, I would like it to be the following: that Ecuador is there to help the world. Ecuador leaves no one behind. And this is why I am sure that the world will not leave Ecuador behind in any of its specific challenges that it faces. Mr. President, Excellencies, when I prepare for these types of events, I usually consult various experts in international relations. They usually mention to me the principles enshrined in the UN Charter, which speaks of sovereign equality of states, of good faith, the peaceful resolution of disputes, territorial integrity, and political independence. It also speaks of the non-use of force to resolve disputes, the full respect for human rights, and I could continue. All these are admirable concepts that throughout almost 8 decades have preserved relative stability that today is being challenged. However, I prefer to begin my intervention by speaking of Mateo, a Latin American student who, as thousands of others, was in Ukraine pursuing his dream, because those who know me know that I am not a scholar or an academic or an assiduous attendee of international forums. The reality is that most of my life I have cultivated a very simple idea, and this idea is that the only way of generating value is by always in every activity that one carries out, always putting human beings at the center, because it is always in human beings that I place my trust. I place my trust in people. And I am going to tell you precisely why that is important. I want to tell you why I believe that this is vital, not only for a country, but for the construction of a world that is more peaceful and stable. I firmly believe that any institution or political system, whether it is national or international, derives its legitimacy from the well-being that it is capable of creating for its citizens. It shouldn't only base its legitimacy in this, but it should renew that legitimacy daily based on the consent of the people who live in that system. And here, in this great institution, we form a family of nations. And nations, in fact, are themselves families of citizens. And from what happens in each one of our small families depends the well-being of the greater family. Its stability depends on it, and ultimately, its peace depends on that well-being. And you can take these words from someone who today leads a country where, in the past, marginality and abandonment have been the breeding ground for magic formulas of the most predictable kind of populism. I am speaking of the same populism that then usually drops its mask and shows its true authoritarian face. The same face that, when it is in the government, flirts with dangerous actors that hide beyond the reach of our international institutions in order to create some of the threats that today bring us together and lead us to ask, what do we do with these threats and challenges? Challenges have various aspects, but I will always insist that if we want to make sure that these threats remain far from us, it is necessary to start by clearly pointing to the ugly face of authoritarianism. And for that, we always need to, as we go into going in a circle, we need to return to the source, the same source. We need to create opportunities for people. We need a global order where all citizens feel included, connected, and represented. An interdependent order where opportunities flow freely from one corner of our planet to the other. We need a balance in which every day is increasingly more difficult for aspiring dictators to blame their failures on supposed asymmetries of the global order. We need to open the doors of opportunity to more people, to more citizens, and to never close those opportunities on the pretext of the false notion of sovereignty, which in reality is not sovereignty, but rather arrogance. We need to understand that international security is not simply a right that one can demand, but rather it is a duty that all of us share. In fact, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, my government has found itself in the strange position of having to inaugurate or launch a fight against a threat that in the past was not confronted head-on, but rather it was concealed. I am speaking of obscure actors who, instead of being fought, were silently accommodated in the hope that no one would notice them. Today, Ecuador is in the midst of a frontal war, an unprecedented war against the traffic of drugs. As mentioned in the last global report on drugs in 2022, Ecuador is the third country in the world with the most cocaine seized. And today, we are stepping up our activities more than ever to maximize the seizures of drugs and to dismantle transnational organizations that transport these drugs. We know that we're not the only ones who are fighting this monster. And by the way, this monster doesn't have only one face, but various faces, such as trafficking of persons, laundering of assets, illegal trafficking of weapons, and even illegal mining. It is calculated that transnational crime moves an amount of money that oscillates between 1.6 and 2.2 trillion dollars. Those are figures that exceed by several factors of 10 the entire economy of a country like Ecuador. However, it would be a mistake to quantify the consequences of transnational crime only in economic terms. We need to also think of, especially in the irreparable losses in terms of the lives lost and dreams destroyed, in the horrifying cries of families, but also in the silence that it imposes in certain communities. Today, just a few days ago, in the center of the city of Guayaquil, where I was born, a prosecutor was cowardly assassinated by hitmen from organized crime. This was an official who was leading various investigations, including certain cases that involve transnational mafias. This murder not only means that Ecuador loses a very important law enforcement official, or that his children will grow up without a father. It is a murder that leaves us an additional lesson, and that is that transnational crime requires a transnational solution, and that we have two options. Or we're going to suffer separately from an enemy that acts in a coordinated fashion in various countries in order to ignore our laws, or we can unite our efforts to vanquish that enemy. The events clearly demonstrate that we need more cooperation, and I will never tire of insisting on this. In Ecuador, it's not just with record seizures, but also with the sacrifice of our officials, and that we're demonstrating that we deserve this assistance and this international help to strengthen institutions And also, these are institutions where these officials are working selflessly. I want to take advantage of this opportunity to work together also to combat against gender violence. In the case of Ecuador, the disappearance of a courageous woman, a lawyer, a mother, and daughter should be the symbol of this challenge, the challenge of combating against violence against women. Ecuador has demonstrated that we're there for the world. The world can count on us, and I'm sure that the world will support us and help us in these challenges. In the area of human mobility, we have taken decisions that have been applauded these days. We're not only maintaining our long trajectory as a transit country, a country that welcomes and is a refuge for migrants, but also traditionally we have been one of the biggest host countries of refugees in the entire Western Hemisphere. But beyond simply welcoming refugees, I want to refer to the treatment that those citizens receive when they enter our country. In Ecuador, we make special efforts to guarantee the rights, and especially, more importantly, the integration of migrants, particularly when we're talking about families whose countries of origin do not offer alternatives of a better life, and these people have no other option other than to flee. For example, 500,000 Venezuelans who today live in Ecuador. We're one of the three main destinations for migrants from this country, and in spite of our budgetary difficulties, we provide assistance to this population with healthcare, education, and other social services. We have also begun a long process of regularization of their status. Just think, Mr. President, what this means in a small country such as ours. Now, think about the impact of a population of that size would have on each one of your countries. This is why I repeat, Ecuador is there for the world. The world can count on Ecuador, and I know that the world will support us with this plan for regularizing the status of our Venezuelan brethren who have had to flee their country. I have the firm hope that this will be the case. But it's not just that. Ecuador is also fulfilling its responsibility in the climate crisis as a country that is the emitter of greenhouse gases. We represent barely 0.18% of global emissions, and yet, without the need to wait or the need to suggest to us, my government took the decision to convert Ecuador in the first country in Latin America and the fourth in the world to adopt a cross-cutting policy towards environmental transition, including creating a special ministry for this. And this is not merely an issue of how much a country has industrialized in the past, but rather how much a country can contribute in the future. This is why almost a year ago, in the framework of the conference, the climate conference in Glasgow, I announced the creation of a new marine reserve called Hermandad, or Brotherhood, in the Galapagos Islands, which increased by 60,000 square kilometers the protected area of this natural heritage site of humanity. That same year, this was further complemented with the signature of a declaration for the preservation and management of ecosystems included in the marine corridor of the East Tropical Pacific, This was we signed this together with my colleagues from the presidents of Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama, to provide a new dimension and political impetus to the goals of the Marine Corridor. Thus, we are opening new opportunities for cooperation, financing, and technical assistance for the conservation not only of equatorial biodiversity or regional biodiversity, but rather global biodiversity. But we're more ambitious. We're looking beyond that. It's in this same very institution where we have promoted the mandate of the General Assembly on the environment in order to negotiate a future treaty on the plastic pollution. And so, in the area of environmental conservation, Ecuador is also there for the world. Mr. President, in each one of the topics I have mentioned here, in each one of these challenges and uncertainties that the future holds before us, Ecuador supports a conviction that we need to find the responses within ourselves. In our understanding that we as human beings share this planet Earth. And what we have in common is much bigger than what divides us, what separates us. And in fact, it could happen that we are not even aware that we have in our hands keys to solve problems that other nations or other individuals are confronting. In fact, that is what happened with Mateo, the student that we managed to transport from Ukraine. If on each challenge we apply that form of thinking, if we dare to tackle each threat from a common position, we will go much farther. For example, take the food crisis, which today has been aggravated by the conflict in Ukraine, and that has meant the worsening of malnutrition in various countries. International figures speak of 52 million children younger than 5 years of age that today suffer malnutrition. 17 million suffer from acute malnutrition, and 155 million suffer from stunted growth. In Ecuador, this problem affects some 30% of children younger than 2 years of age, and in the most tragic cases in some of our poorest provinces, the figure is above 35% of malnutrition. To confront this problem, my government has been a pioneer. We have created a technical secretariat. It's called Ecuador Develops Without Child Malnutrition, and I have set a very clear goal for my term: reduce during my term of government by 6 percentage points the malnutrition of children, and we have ensured the participation of civil society, academia, the private sector, and local governments in these efforts. And however, we can certainly do even more. We can dare to think as a global community. I won't be revealing any kind of secret to you if I tell you how fertile is the land in Ecuador, how productive our land is. If that land is worked with optimism and dedication. We are the country where cocoa is grown, banana, where we produce shrimp, but also avocado and a lot of other agricultural goods. It makes no sense that our children, or children from anywhere in the world, suffer hunger. in this situation or any other situation, and especially given that the land is there to be harvested, not only for food but also for opportunities. This new Ecuador today represents advantages that could serve not only to ease hunger, but also to create this world that is more stable and peaceful that I mentioned, where citizens are included every single day, feel more included through the creation of opportunities. That is the world that I see. That is the world that today we are proposing to you from Ecuador. Lastly, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, former Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, said peace is a form of being, of relating to others, of living on this planet. It cannot be decreed only through treaties. It must be nourished with rights and the abilities and skills of every single individual. End of quote. I believe that in very few words that encapsulates the spirit of what I've tried to say, and I will take this opportunity to express the support of Ecuador for the efforts of the Secretary General, the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. I would like to, in conclusion, thank everyone for the overwhelming support for the election of my country as a member of the Security Council for the period 2023-2024. Our participation will take place in a context in which humankind is experiencing a period of uncertainty and unprecedented challenges. But you can always be certain that, as we have always done, Ecuador will be there, fulfilling its duty to the world. We will conduct ourselves with coherency and transparency, with an emphasis on supporting humanitarian assistance and peacekeeping operations, on the protection of civilians in situation of armed conflict, on the agenda of women, peace and security, on the fight against arms trafficking, and always addressing emerging challenges in the context of sustaining peace. In all this, and each